Okay, if I can introduce our next speaker, who is John, G4IRN. John started listening to shortwave DX radio broadcasts in his teenage years, which, as you can tell, is some years ago, I think.
It's a bit harsh.
And soon became hooked on the idea of obtaining a radio license and contacting all this DX himself. And having to learn Morse to gain access to the HF bands was never an obstacle, and CW has been his favourite mode ever since. And although John was out of the hobby for 20 years, when he came back in 2002, he decided to fulfil his dream of being on the DX end of pileups, and has embarked on many one-man and teamed expeditions since then. John's last overseas expeditions were a solo effort to the Andaman Islands, VU4G, and a group contesting effort from Costa Rica, TI7W in 2020. And plans are afoot for another DXpedition in 2023. So we'll see what that brings. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Everyone can hear me, I hope? Yeah. And if I wander out of the camera zone, give me a shout. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Ian. DXCC and IOTA DXpedition planning and operation. Now, I assume the reason I've been asked to do this talk is because I've done lots of DXpeditions across the whole spectrum of holiday style with a small rig and a suitcase to fairly serious one-man efforts like to the VU4, the Andaman Islands and Mayotte and Seychelles in the past and various other destinations, plus lots of team DXpeditions as well, which bring a different dynamic to the whole thing. So any DXpedition, whether it's for IOTA or DXCC, really the planning stage is probably the most important part. You want to get it right, and the more effort and detail you put into the planning, then the better the DXpedition will be. What I'm going to cover in this presentation is not just the planning, but the travel, the operating, and the post-operation responsibilities that you'll have as a DXpeditioner as well. So why do we do it? Well, why do we do radio? I mean, the pileups are a big thrill, obviously. That's a big part of it, and being able to go to rare DX destinations and work your mates, for one, is a thrill. Also, I love learning about propagation when I'm in different parts of the world and just experiencing what it's like away from the UK, the British Isles, in the Pacific or South America. And, you know, when you go to the Pacific and you start realizing how many Japanese stations there are, most of which that you don't hear from the UK, and even from South America, where you hear loads of Caribbean stations that you wouldn't, and South American stations that you wouldn't normally hear in the UK either. It just opens your eyes to propagation. But also, obviously, traveling to different countries. Some of the countries that I've been to are third world and have got completely different cultures, you know, poor economies, and you see how people live, and yet they're so happy. So again, it just opens your eyes to the world. But also, if you're going in a group, then it's an opportunity to hang out with mates, have a few laughs along the way, learn, share knowledge, etc. And maybe other reasons. Shout if you've got any. So, of course, the first question that always comes up, and I've got this one in mind at the moment for a potential trip next year, is where to? It's always the last question as well. When you're finished at the expedition, where next? But it depends what your motives are. And, you know, a holiday at the expedition is fairly easy to, if you're going away with the family, to throw a rig in your suitcase and a bit of wire. Or if you want a more serious effort, then you might want to go away on your own. But you're going to have considerations like budget. You're going to have considerations like availability of time off work, whether you're going to go with mates and who would want to go with you. I planned a DXpedition a few years ago. We had a team of 4 lined up, and 3 of them dropped out by the time we went. So, you know, there's lots of factors in play here, but also ease of travel. There's a group going to a small place called Bouvet Island next year, which if you look on Expedia, just no flights at all. However, Bouvet licensing is very easy. So obviously you've got to think of all these things, and they all factor in. Is it when I go over there I get feedback? Okay, I'll stay over here. Okay. So, and also time of year as well. So you might want to, if you're going to go away in the middle of summer, then you'll find that the propagation may be completely different to winter. And also, of course, the sunspot cycle. We're now coming into sunspot peak, and high bands are starting to pick up. And if you're doing 6 meters, for instance, you might want to go in midsummer. So single operator or multi-operator, there's pros and cons. So I've done a lot of single operator DXpeditions, and of course you're your own boss. You can do what you want, you can do it when you want, you can be flexible, you don't have to think about anyone else apart from perhaps family. But you know, the cons are that you can't take as much gear as you would in a group. You may have to be less flexible on the bands you're going to operate. So for instance, taking a 18-meter spider pole for 160 and a HF beam as well isn't, unless you really want to pay for excess luggage, it's really not tenable. And the other thing is you have to carry all the gear as well. So certainly if you're traveling on your own, it's best if you can carry it all. Whereas multi-operator trips, you know, you can group a load of people together that have all got different skills. Typically on a multi-operator DXpedition, you might have people with RF skills, with electrical skills, with IT skills, antenna skills, and a bunch of people who are good at putting antennas up. So having that mix of people in a group is quite important. But also it gives you possibilities for much more challenging DXpeditions, going to perhaps places that you wouldn't go to on your own because you've got safety in numbers. Also, these are an opportunity for less experienced DXpeditioners to perhaps get involved and experience pilots for the first time. But one thing to bear in mind is that the group dynamics change as you get bigger. If you've got a small, close-knit group of, say, 4 or 6 people, you'll find that you can quite happily stick together. But then you've got the other extreme, the 5-star type DXpeditions that people went on a few years ago, and I imagine the dynamics were very different, and that maybe subgroups start happening. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but just something to be aware of. It might be like herding cats at times if you're trying to manage something like that. So there's probably a critical number that is correct for a multi-operator DXpedition. But there's a lot to be said for multi-operator in terms of what everyone can bring to the party and take gear and so on. So thinking about going on DXpedition and where to go, there's a number of resources that I typically would look at online. Now, if you're thinking of IOTA, then you've obviously got the IOTA directory on the IOTA website, which has the full list of islands. And there's a surprising number of islands, some of which you may never have thought had their own IOTA reference. But certainly for the IOTA contest, it's worth referring to that and looking at previous IOTA contest results to see where you may find a unique island that you can go to. But Clublog, I don't know if Michael's here this weekend, but Clublog is a great resource, and there's a number of things on there that I would normally look at when thinking about DXpedition, and in fact I've been doing that this week. So first of all is the most wanted list. So these are DXCC most wanted rather than IOTA. But the most wanted list, which is derived from all the accumulated logs on Clublog, you can filter it by mode, by continent, and so on. And the place to start is at the top of the list, and then start working your way down until you find a country that you think, oh, I can go there and get a license. That's around number 80 in the list. You'll find that number 1 you can't go to, or at least get a license there. And then the next bunch are very, very difficult to get to. It involves sailing boats and maybe political challenges, and all sorts of other risks. But it's a good starting point. The other thing, another couple of things that I would normally look at in Club Log when thinking about where to go, you can get some graphs out of historical activity from the various DXCC entities. So it's useful to look at when these entities were active and how many QSOs they made from their logs if they're online. And the other thing that's useful in Club Log in terms of the expedition planning is the Great Circle map, knowing which direction other countries are going to be in from your DX location. So I mentioned the IOTA website. The other great resource I use is ng3k.com, which is a tabulated presentation of all of the expeditions going on. He gets the information from the various news sheets and from information that people send in, but he's also got on there all the historical entries from previous years. So if you come up with a potential DXpedition destination, check it out on ng3k. There you can see who went, when they went, and it's always quite useful. What I do is contact someone who was on that previous DXpedition or one of those DXpeditions to my target destination and ask about where they stayed, ask about getting licenses, ask about any other challenges that they had. So it's starting to build up a picture of what's possible and when you get there, what resources may be there for you to operate. So there's a number of other considerations that we'd normally have as well when we're planning the expedition. I've mentioned licensing, but logistics as well. How do you get there? You know, if you're going to the Pacific somewhere, it may be 3 flights to get there. It may involve stopovers on the way. I mentioned contacting previous visitors. Another great asset, if you can get it, is local contacts, and particularly when we used to do our Voodoo Contest Group trips down to West Africa, we'd always have someone on the ground in the country, a local guy, who would help us out with hotel bookings and transportation, security, that kind of thing. So it might be that even there's a local ham in your chosen target area that you can hook up with, and he can help you with licenses and so on. But also, you need to start thinking about where you might stay. And is there any space for antennas? And indeed, power. Some of these more remote places, especially for IOTA, might not have any power. You might have to think about generator power. Can you afford the fuel? And that's another consideration these days. But all these things come into the mix really when you're starting when you're doing the planning. Okay, on the licensing, of course, I think for full UK licenses, I'm not sure about the others, you can use it for CEPT. So CEPT TR61-1 allows you to operate overseas in the CEPT member countries. They're not all European. With your own license prefixed with the country prefix where you are. You have to be present in the country. Your license has to state that you can use it under CEPT. It's not valid for club call signs, but it's very, very useful if you want to operate overseas in one of these CEPT member countries. Something we're thinking about is that they're not all in Europe. There's CEPT countries in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. So really it opens up a multitude of possibilities in terms of just going in and being able to operate without having to get a specific license. I've got here on the screen 3 different license, the 2 on the left are license documents. The one on the left was for Swaziland, as it was known, and that was dead easy to get, but I had a contact in South Africa get that for me, and it was fairly cheap, and it was just a fairly easy process to get it. Maldives was easy to get. So Maldives was a holiday DXpedition. The The Swaziland one actually was, I did that with a company that used to be called DX Safaris. I don't know if they're still around, but basically an African guy would rent you, a ZS6 guy would rent you, you might know, they're still around, rent you the towers and the radios, etc. It was taken over by, the original guy was ZS6 WPX, so he lives in the States now. And it was taken over by another ZS station. I don't know if it's still going. But that's another way of doing DXpedition, rent. Yeah, and I did that on my own. I didn't have to take any gear. And in fact, on that one, I mentioned about traveling on your own. You tend to become more gregarious if you travel on your own. You know, you want to be able to engage with people, or at least I do. And if you're on your own, there's more reason for doing that. And when I went to Swaziland, actually one of the radios I was renting or given to use was a 2-meter FM box, and there was a local repeater, and I found some activity on that and got invited out to dinner a couple of times just by local hams. So, you know, it pays just to sort of look around and see who's there. When we went to the Maldives, it was a holiday DXpedition, or rather it was a holiday with DXpedition on the side. We were in our room on the island, and the phone rang just on the second morning, I think, and it was the infrastructure manager at the resort. He was also a ham. He'd heard that I was staying there, and we were there with 2 friends. He gave us basically run of the VIP restaurant and took us out on free boat trips and showed us around. We had a great time there. So, you know, it's great and surprising who you bump into when you're on these trips if you put the feelers out. The one on the right actually isn't a license, that's a permit to operate. So this one was in the Andaman Islands, where actually you can operate there with an Indian, just a normal Indian license, but then you need the permit to operate. And I enlisted the help of Indian hams to help me get the VU license, and that in itself was quite a prolonged process, because they go through security checks not only on yourself but your parents as well. So there's a lot of paperwork to do and 4 copies of it all. And then once all that's done, you have to get the permit to operate, which is issued from the Andaman Islands itself. And I didn't actually get that piece of paper until I'd arrived in the Andaman Islands. So you talk about, you know, risk and potential things that can go wrong. I didn't know whether I'd be operating until I actually arrived there. There's actually 3 names on that. This was going to be a team of 4. 1 dropped out fairly early on, and 3 of us were all ready to go to the island, and then the other 2 dropped out, and I ended up going. They thought I would cancel, but I said, no, I'm still going to go, and I went on my own. So licenses sorted out. Next thing to think about is QTH. Now, I mentioned the Great Circle map on Clublog. Wherever you go, do check out the paths to the main areas of population, which are North America, Europe, and Japan. And also check out which are probably the most difficult openings as well, because I can guarantee you, wherever you go to, there will be people who need to work you, particularly from, you know, the other side of the globe, and they'll take time off work, they'll rearrange their diary, you know, they'll want to work you. So it's worth checking out these more difficult paths, and when the openings might be, judging off the propagation predictions and experience, of course, comes into play. But the best QTH that you can get is by the water with a clear sea path to your target population areas. And top right, you see the Great Circle map that comes off Clublog. You just plug in the locator of where you're going to be, and it gives you the map. And so it's easy to set up. There's a guy on from Marquesas at the moment, TX7G, and there's been some chatter on the CDXC reflector about his QTH. That there's some confusion whether it's on the south side of the island or the centre of the island. Now, I've never been to Marquesas, but looking at pictures, it's got a lot of big mountains, very volcanic. And if he is on the south side of the island, then he's on the wrong side for short path Europe, which is why he's been weak most of the time, I would guess. If he'd been on the north side of that island with a beach, with an antenna, verticals preferably, right by the water, or VDAs. And if you want to know about VDAs, speak to G3WGN. Is he here? No. He'll be at the bar later. They're the absolute ultimate DXpedition antenna, and they're very lightweight, easy to carry, and high performers. If you can't get by the water, then try and get elevated land with a clear takeoff in the directions that you want. When we went to the Maldives, I made sure when we booked, we got a chalet on the north side of the island. And my wife said, but the sunshine won't be on the back of the chalet. So that was an argument to win, but we did get on the north side. I said, we won't be in the room most of the time. Unless the bands are open, yeah. And actually, holiday DXpedition is, there's always a period when you're getting ready for dinner. It takes us guys 6 minutes, doesn't it? And I don't know if I should say this with a couple of ladies in the room, but you know where I'm going. There's always about an hour, while the ladies are getting ready. 2 hours, 5 minutes. While the ladies are getting ready, you've got an hour to operate, and it's usually in the evening, so darkness is starting to set, and you've got the grey line. So it's a great opportunity to do a bit of DXing. Another great resource is Google Earth. Now, this is VU4 Andaman Islands was my most recent, sort of big solo DXpedition. So that's why I'm referring to that. But this was a Google bird's eye shot of the resort where I stayed. Now, you'll see a yellow line from the beach to a building. I'm not allowed to walk over there, but you can see it. That was the line that I superimposed with, it was Google Earth actually rather than Google Maps. But it gives you an idea of how much coax you need to take. So I knew which building I'd be operating in, which was the conference room, that building there. And then I measured out the distance to the water's edge, and then I immediately knew how much coax to take. And it's fairly accurate. So it's a great planning tool. Of course, what I didn't bank on was the fact that 3 people were going to drop out of the DXpedition, so I wasn't going to hire the conference room on my own. It was too expensive. So I ended up being in the end cottage on that row that's sort of leading to the conference center. So that made my coax run longer. So I was able to plan for that. The other thing I didn't realize at the time was that you weren't allowed on the beach because of the crocodiles. So it made the coax a bit shorter on the sea end of it. But nevertheless, it's a great resource. But when you're thinking about the travel, it's not just coax, of course. Take a radio, PSU. If you don't know what your antenna situation is going to be like, you'll want to take various bits of wire, maybe plan for dipoles or verticals, ground planes. Then, do you take a spare radio? If you're spending a lot of money going a long way, you don't want to risk the possibility of a radio failure or a PSU failure. So I'd normally take a couple of radios, a couple of PSUs, just the one amplifier, and hope for the best. But there's all the other sort of miscellaneous stuff that goes with it as well. Multimeters, antenna analyzers, interconnecting leads, cutters, etc., pliers, and it all adds up. And the weight in the end, invariably there'll be excess baggage, but you've got to manage that. Now, normally I would make a spreadsheet of all the equipment that I'm going to take, so that I can refer to it. If you're going as a group, of course, you can split the not only the planning, but the responsibilities for taking the kit as well. So you'll have Skype meetings leading up to the DXpedition and divvy out all the responsibilities for the planning and the kit and so on. Normally what I do is a spreadsheet. Also, what I normally do as well as I pack is just photograph everything with my phone as I put it in. In the event that you do lose your bag at the airport or it doesn't arrive, then not only have you got the spreadsheet, but you've got the proof that it went in as well on your phone. So that's something else that I do. Normally when I travel as well, I'd take, of course, details of the accommodation and my travel details, but also a copy of my UK license and my destination license. I'd have, just in case, contact details for any local hams that I may have previously been in contact with, and maybe the IARU rep for the country that you're going to. When we used to go to West Africa, the French-speaking countries, I had a booklet from the French National Society about ham radio in French from RAF. And well, it always happened, when they wanted to stop you and wonder what on earth you were carrying, that was my go-to sort of literature to give to the customs people just to explain ham radio. In the event, it didn't really matter because all they were after was money. But yeah, you have to talk your way out of that one. So yeah, again, planning, make sure you take everything with you and cater for any failures as well. So, getting nearer to the trip, normally what I would do is tell people about my trip, evangelize, and especially, there'll be people who perhaps if you're going to a rare place are wanting to know when you're going to be operating. I don't bother announcing frequencies. There has been a tendency for DXpeditions to say what frequency they will be on, but invariably any frequency you've got in mind, someone else will be on there and people will find you. So normally I'd go to these outlets and let them know that I'm going away somewhere, give them the details, the dates and call signs and operators and so on. The announced DX operations, NG3K1 is the one I mentioned earlier in my research tools. DX World, Daily DX, DX 425 News, most DXers know about them, and they're a good place to advertise what you're doing. Okay, how are we doing for time?
Okay, 10 minutes.
Okay. So, travel. Well, again, Andaman Islands. I was lent a phone and SIM card with an Indian SIM card to use in India before I departed for Andaman Islands. Normally I'd try and get a local SIM card before I go, and certainly look at roaming charges, because in some of these third world countries in particular, roaming charges can be quite high. Actually, in the event in the Andaman Islands, the Indian phone that I'd been lent, there was no signal, so maybe no network for that particular operator. But my Vodafone, UK Vodafone phone did work. So I had to rely on that, albeit expensive, for calls home. The connection wasn't very good anyway, but calls home, daily upload of logs to Club Log, and WhatsApp messaging and so on. And I was sort of fearing a fairly large bill when I got home, but it never appeared. So I can only assume that the systems weren't hooked up or something. But so if you ever go to the Andaman Islands, Vodafone UK is free, or at least it was at the time. But other considerations, your travel insurance, and particularly the medical aspects of that, share the details with your travel partners. It's no good if somebody gets knocked unconscious or meets with an accident if no one else knows their insurance details. And even on the many multi-operator trips I've been on, I'm rarely asked by the group for my insurance details. Whether you take equipment insurance or not is up to you. I tend to self-insure on that, but certainly the medical I would always take insurance out. And I mentioned about contacts. In addition to ham contacts, think about having contact details for the embassy and, in case of insurance claim, airline details, accommodation, etc. as well. And also just contact details for your family back home as well. I think they call it ICE in case of emergency. I have an ICE contact on my phone. Whether anyone overseas would know what ICE is, I don't know, but maybe put a piece of paper in your wallet with the emergency contact details on. Right, so we're kind of still in the planning stages. Let's commence. Okay, so it doesn't need to be expensive and difficult to get to this DXpedition where we're going. This was an Airbnb place that my wife and I rented, so it's holiday style DXpedition in Madeira. I did this for CQ Worldwide a couple of years ago, 2019, and we'd actually seen the place on a previous trip to Madeira. And I thought, well, that would look good because it's on the north side of the island and it's good takeoff. Although it's not by the sea, it's elevated. So it's good takeoff to North America and Europe. And Japan was a bit iffy, but it was okay. So I planned to do CQ Worldwide, just a single band entry. So I didn't have to take many antennas. In fact, what you can see there, I took 2 fiberglass poles, and I had an elevated 15-meter ground plane on one and a 15-meter dipole on the other. So it gave me a bit of flexibility in terms of angle of radiation and directivity and so on for the contest. I hooked up with a Portuguese contester that I'd worked many times, and I'd actually done a software favor for him a few years ago, so it was payback time, and he got me a short call sign, CR3S for Madeira, better than CT9/G4IRN, and had a lot of fun. So, you know, you don't have to put a lot of finance and logistical planning into these DXpeditions if you just want to run pilots. Just careful thought about what might be relatively rare. And of course, Madeira in CQ Worldwide terms it counts as Africa, so it's a 3-point contact. And ran some good pilots and runs into the USA in the contest from there. So that was a single solo effort, although holiday style. And this one, Easter Island, which was in 2013. This was with Martin, G3ZAY, and Michael, G7VJR, Club Logman, and Nigel, G3TXF. It's interesting because it was a bit of an eye-opener for me, this, because we had this hotel which was fairly elevated, so it had good takeoffs all round, and we just put these vertical dipoles up. They're in quite close proximity, as you can see from the picture there, and then we jumped on our radios. I think we had 3 or 4 radios set out, and there was just horrific sort of hash from one radio to another, and we thought, okay, let's stand back and look at this. And it wasn't until we put ferrite clamps on the feed points of all the antennas that it cleared this noise up. And once we'd done that, it was fine. Of course, you need to avoid harmonic frequencies. So typically on 40 meters, you'll pick up your 80 meter signals. You have to space yourself apart, maybe go high on 80. But when you start operating in a multi-operator environment, you start learning these things. And of course, with multi-operators as well, you want to ensure that everyone gets a fair crack of the whip. So you'll have operating rotors and think about meal times. And there may be a point in the day when you all want to eat together and even spend a day and go out on a trip if you're in a place like Easter Island, because you're probably only ever going to go there once in your life. And then, of course, there's a computer network as well, and whatever software you use, whether it's M1MM or other DXpedition software, WinTest, DXlog, need to protect it from interference as well. And whether you use wireless or wired, I would normally prefer a wireless network to avoid interference. In terms of operating, well, certainly, know where you want to hand out the QSOs to. So if you just want to work Europe, that's fine, but do consider the other hard-to-get-to areas and when those openings might be, as I mentioned earlier. But expect surprises, because you do get these, if you've gone somewhere weird and wonderful, you get these openings that you never imagined might exist. So do listen out and, across the bands at times when you wouldn't normally expect to. Managing pilots, not so much not an issue in a contest particularly, but certainly on DXpeditions, be conscious of the spread of the pilot and manage it. Don't let it spread too far. It can be very, very tempting to let it spread, especially if it's you're not used to it and it's very loud. and you panic a bit, and the further up you go, the more stations you're hearing in the clear. However, what it's doing is leaving gaps at the bottom, and also you have to learn how to manage your radio using the RF gain and the filter and AF gain even as well. You can start to learn how the radio performs in pile-ups and get the best out of it by playing around with it, so that you can separate stations, particularly in CW. But the important things in DXpedition operating: be consistent. There's, I won't say who he is, but there's a French guy operating at the moment that seems to throw all sorts of bonjour and 73s at all sorts of odd times into his rhythm, and it's a bit unpredictable what he's when he's going to be free again to call, and that generally causes lots of ill-timed callers in the pilot. But adhere to the DX code of conduct on both sides of the pilot. If you're not familiar with that, check it out on Google. And yeah, of course, when it goes quiet, there's usually some time in the day when the bands go quiet, usually early morning, especially if you're in the Pacific or far off somewhere. Plan that as your sleep time, so that you can enjoy the busy hours. But most important of all, have fun. That's the whole purpose. Just a bit more about radios. A spectrum display is really, really useful to see your pilot. And in fact, if you look here, this was my pilot. I'm on 27028 something, I think, and you can see my CW pilot 2 kcs above that. There's about, if you look into the detail there's about 30 stations calling in my pilot, you can see. There's actually another pilot on the right-hand side of the screen. I forget who it was. They were in Africa, I think. So, of course, I can actually see where my pilot is and make sure I don't damage his pilot. So it's very, very useful to have that spectrum display. However, it tends to be the SDR radios where you have these spectrum displays, and I don't believe that they perform as well in pile-ups, handling the pile-up. You have to drive them a lot differently. You're a lot more on the RF gain and on the attenuator, and it's much more consistent, that interactivity. If you take something like a K3 or a K2, a super het radio, they are much more tolerant of big, loud signals coming in. But make sure you're, as part of the planning process, make sure that you're comfortable with the radios and the software. And of course, if you're going with a group, make sure you test everything before you go. 5 minutes, okay. I'm coming to a close now anyway. The risk, don't forget, when you go on holiday, I'll say, when you go away, there's always things that you might do that you wouldn't normally do. And the snake, I took that myself and I nearly stood on it. Honduras, found myself climbing a tower, which I probably shouldn't have done really. I went to San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which was the most dangerous and violent city in the world at the time because of the drugs and gangs there. I mentioned crocodiles in VU4. I forget where the bulls were. I think that was Easter Island. But there's dangers all around us, so just be very, very careful. And then obviously you do the expedition, and finally, post-operation, do the right thing, upload your log to LOTW. For IOTA, you have to put the name of the island and the IOTA reference on the card. It can't be handwritten. You can put it on the label, it can be printed, but it mustn't be handwritten. Preferably put it on the card, and you can see what I've done there. And of course also, I think IOTA is checked off Club Log and LOTW, is it? Yeah. So upload to there as well. And of course, you're doing everyone a big favour for their DXCC credits as well, if you upload to Logbook. And that was it. I hope the timing's okay. Good. Thumbs up. Thank you very much. Any questions? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. That was great. Thank you very much. Any questions, anybody? I'll bring the mic over to you. Chris.
Are you still using your spreadsheet that you designed many years ago?
Right, okay. I actually looked at it recently. So I did a talk maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, in which I'd done a spreadsheet with all the countries down the left and some columns with tick boxes on whether you could get direct flights there, whether it was CPT, could get an easy license. And actually, it was a dead easy way. You put the filters on Excel, and you immediately came up with the potential destinations, CPT license, easy to travel to, etc. So I've still got that spreadsheet. I remember years ago I uploaded it to the CDXC Reflector. We may have been on a different platform then. But I think I'll dust that off and put it on the file section of the CDXC Reflector.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions?
Yes, thank you. Very interesting talk. Julian, pre-pandemic, I guess the K3 was the rig of choice. 2023, what will be the rig of choice on DXpeditions?
If I was to go away today and not take the K3, I would probably take an FTDX10. So the K4, let me qualify the answer as well, actually, because there's lots of other good radios around. But I've used the 7300 on DXpedition. Great radio, great price point, but it did struggle with big pileups. It really did. Whether, say, the 7610 would be better, I suspect it would be, because it's a more expensive, higher-end radio. The K4, I think the jury's still out. I don't know anyone who's operated one in a DXpedition. But the Superhet module that fits on top of the SDR backend isn't available yet, I don't think. So it is a pure SDR radio at the minute. But I would go, because of its architecture, I'd go for the FTDX10.
Okay.
Hi, Mike, G70WC. Thanks for that. What budget ranges would you be talking about? I mean, there's multi-op, obviously, you can spread the costs. But single op, are we talking, say, 5K, 10K, 2K?
Well, the big ticket costs are your flight and accommodation and food once you're there. They're the big ticket costs. So obviously, the further you fly, and with the dollar as it is, then the more expensive it will be. But I mean, for a couple of weeks in, say, the Andaman Islands, you're probably talking $2 or $3 grand off the top of my head, I would have thought, if you're on your own. The licenses don't cost anything. The operating doesn't cost anything. You might have incidentals when you're out there, but they're the big ticket costs: the flight, accommodation, and food, and beer.
Okay, Chris.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I would agree that those are the key things, and that doesn't make much difference whether you are single op or multi-op, because you pay your own costs. And the only thing that is shared, of course, is some of the excess baggage. Thing I was going to say, John, is another planning tool that we've used on 6Gs, which Dave WGN found, was Hey, What's That?
Oh, yes.
And that gives you takeoff angles. So if you're not on the beach, you can look at the obscuration all around. And we used that to select which hotel we were going to go to on one of I can't remember which one it was now, but we looked at a number of sites. And you can pick which is the one you want to get those takeoffs. So that's worth adding to the list. Yeah,
good point. And the only thing, I mean, it's a great site, and you plug in your coordinates. It's based on Google Maps. You find where your operating location and the height of your antenna, and it will give you a panoramic view of the points that you have visibility of. It kind of put me off, though, a little bit. When I saw MyQTH, I thought, oh, it's rubbish. But I know MyQTH is working fine, so you have to interpret it correctly.
Well, it's 1 degree takeoff,
and we never achieved that, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.